This program is supported by
North Luzon Express Terminal, RJK Services Manpower Agency Corporation, Stark Molecular Laboratory.
Thousands of motorcyclists in Bogota, Colombia, protest against an ordinance that prohibits them from carrying passengers on Thursday to Saturday nights. The measure was imposed on the grounds of insecurity and the terrorist threat hanging over the capital in the run-up to the presidential elections. More details on this later in the news. Good evening, I am CJ Hirro.
And I am Nina Ricci, Alagao, Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. The top stories for tonight.
NATO chief warns conflict in Ukraine could last for years. Sri Lankan president revoked state of emergency. Massive protests ensue. Colombia to extradite its most wanted drug kingpin to the U.S. The United Kingdom sends a robot boat to map explosive volcanoes aftermath in Tonga. And Van Gogh exhibit features his life, works, and secrets in an immersive experience.
The White House has imposed sanctions on two daughters of Russian President Vladimir Putin. It claimed to see a pattern of President Vladimir Putin and Russian oligarchs stashing assets and resources in the bank accounts of their family members. At a briefing in Washington, Press Secretary Jen Psaki also said the Russian brokerage firms are manipulating the market on their end.
Okay, thanks so much. All right. Well, we've seen a pattern over time of President Putin and Russian oligarchs stash assets and resources in the bank accounts and of their family members. And so this was an effort to get at those assets, and that's why these days ahead for the Ukrainian people. There's a likely scenario where this could go on for some time, and even as they have moved their forces and they've retreated from Kyiv, they retreated from the north and the west, and they're consolidating forces in the east and in the Donbass. And we've warned that we're entering a new phase of the conflict that could last for some time. It doesn't mean it will look exactly the same, or the needs or the resources will be exact.
Psaki adds that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is entering a new phase.
That there are tough days ahead for the Ukrainian people. There's a likely scenario where this could go on for some time, and even as they have moved their forces and they've retreated from Kyiv, they retreated from the north and the west, and they're consolidating forces in the east and in the Donbass. And we've warned that we're entering a new phase of the conflict that could last for some time. It doesn't mean it will look exactly the same, or the needs or the resources will be exactly the same.
Also hit by the new U.S. sanctions were the wife and daughter of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and members of Russia's Security Council, including Russia's Foreign President and Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev and Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. Now, the White House alleged in a statement that these individuals enriched themselves at the expense of the Russian people, while some of them are responsible for providing the support necessary to underpin Putin's war on Ukraine. The White House also declared full blocking sanctions on Russia's largest public and private financial institutions, Sberbank and Alfa Bank, and said all new U.S. investment in Russia was now prohibited. More sanctions would be announced in the coming days on key Russian state enterprises, aiming to hamper their ability to trade and move money through the global financial system. A U.S. or senior U.S. official on grounds of anonymity said the U.S., in alignment with G7 allies and partners, is intensifying the most severe sanctions ever levied on a major economy.
Published data show that after weeks of increasingly harsh Western sanctions, Russia's economy is beginning to show cracks. Residents of St. Petersburg react to the new realities of daily life as prices increase but wages stay the same. Some residents lament that trips to the store can be very disheartening.
Нет, никак не готовились. Были не готовы к этому. Цены выросли, соответственно, зарплаты не поднимают.
Others admit that what they're going through is something unprecedented and they can do nothing about it.
Раз руководство свыше и наш президент считает, что нужно повышение, так я в это как бы с этим спокойно согласилась бы, потому что делать? Всем нужно помогать.
Russia earlier said it had been forced to make foreign debt payments on dollar-denominated bonds in rubles, raising the prospect of a potential default amid unprecedented Western sanctions over the Ukraine conflict.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said there's no sign of Russian President Vladimir Putin stopping. He added the war could last for years. Stoltenberg said the conflict had reached a critical phase as Moscow moved its battered forces out of the north of Ukraine and rearmed them in preparation for a major offensive in the east. Ahead of a meeting of foreign ministers, Stoltenberg said they have not seen any indication that President Putin has changed his ambition to control the whole of Ukraine and rewrite the international order.
There is no quick fix. If we want to reduce oil prices, supply must increase. This was a common sentiment among executives of the United States' largest oil companies. They virtually testified before the House Energy and Commerce Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee on record high gas prices following Russia's conflict with Ukraine. Chevron chairman and CEO Michael Wirth said price gouging will not be tolerated.
At Shell, we recognize that rising energy prices as a result of building pressure on oil supply pose a significant challenge for consumers and businesses. Shell is focused on doing our part to ensure a reliable supply of energy products and mitigate the disruptions caused by efforts to move away from Russian hydrocarbons in the global marketplace.
Meanwhile, Shell USA President Gretchen Watkins said keeping a steady source of energy products is the company's priority.
Today, Russia provides roughly 10% of the oil needed to meet global demand and about 30% of Europe's natural gas demand. A loss of this volume would be much more significant than the impact of the Arab oil embargo and would represent the largest supply disruption in the history of our industry. Unfortunately, there's no quick fix, but in the near term, the answer is straightforward. If we want to reduce prices, we need to increase supply.
In West Africa, former Prime Minister Ibrahima Kassory of Fofana and 3 ex-ministers in Conakry, Guinea have reportedly been detained on embezzlement charges. Led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, Guinea's military junta deposed elected President Alpha Conde amid fierce protests over his successful bid for a third term. After seizing power last year, Doumbouya's junta promised to fight endemic corruption in the West African state. It also stressed that it would not launch a witch hunt.
Meanwhile, in South America, a farm worker who took part in a roadblock protest in Peru died following clashes with police. The violence came a day after Peruvian President Pedro Castillo called off a curfew in Lima aimed at curbing nationwide protests against rising fuel prices. The clashes broke out after police tried to break up a blockade by dozens of farm workers on the Panamericana Highway, the country's most important highway for people and goods. 12 police officers and 3 civilians were injured in the incident. Tensions had been building up in Peru since Monday when truckers called for a strike and protests broke out in Lima and other parts of the country over rising food and fuel prices. In an attempt to appease protesters, the government over the weekend eliminated a tax on fuel and decreed a 10% increase in the minimum wage from May 1. But the General Confederation of Workers of Peru, the country's main trade union federation, has remained defiant and called for more protests.
In Sri Lanka, hundreds of medical students stormed and occupied the health ministry in the capital, Colombo, to protest medicine shortages. There were also spontaneous protests from across the island where people were queued to buy fuel. Public anger is at a fever pitch, with crowds attempting to storm the homes of several government figures, including President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. More than 60 people have been arrested in connection with the unrest, and many said they were tortured in police custody. Sri Lanka Parliament Speaker told legislators that more hardships were to come as the country appeared at the brink of a political impasse. He added that food, gas, and electricity shortages will get worse. There will be very acute food shortages and starvation. Scarce supplies of food and fuel, along with record inflation and electricity rationing, have inflicted widespread misery in the country's most painful downturn since independence from Britain in 1948.
Heavy rains have caused rivers in Sydney's south to swell and trigger warnings from authorities of potentially damaging floods. The flood warning came after weeks of extreme weather in Australia's east. Although flood levels were still below those seen last month, locals were bracing for water levels to rise as rain continues to lash the region. Some residents expressed concern about the property damage flooding causes, especially in lower areas. For weeks, Australia's east has been smashed by extreme weather, fueled by La Niña weather patterns and climate change. Record rainfalls and deadly flooding have killed at least 22 people since early February. Coming up, extradition to the U.S. of accused drug kingpin and crime gang leader Otoniel approved by the Colombian court. Spain to drop indoor mask wearing from April 20. And President Jair Bolsonaro vetoes a bill that would have provided aid funds to Brazilian artists hit hard by the pandemic. More of these stories when Mata ng Agila International returns.
This portion is brought to you by
318 Automart,
Arlex Trading and Construction Supplies.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Shanghai announced that parents are now allowed to accompany child patients with special needs to COVID isolation facilities. Officials said they are accepting voluntary applications from guardians who, with full knowledge of potential health risks, can accompany their children after signing a letter of notification and commitment. The new arrangement came after a public backlash over the previous policy, which has separated COVID-positive babies and children from parents who test negative. China's National Health Commission said the country recorded 20,472 infections on Wednesday, the highest daily number reported since the peak of the initial outbreak in Wuhan. Shanghai's fresh round of tests on the entire population ensues as NHC official Lei Zhenlong said Shanghai's prevention and control situation is very severe.
In Europe, the Spanish government said it will drop the use of face masks indoors, except in hospitals and on public transport. The new rule will be implemented beginning April 20 due to declining COVID-19 infections. Health Minister Carolina Darius said advisors recommended the indoor face mask rule be lifted after the Lenten break on April 17 and the government to pass a decree to end it during the cabinet meeting on April 19. Spain, one of the hardest-hit nations during the first wave of the pandemic in early 2020, stopped mandatory outdoor mask use, although many people still wear one in crowded areas. The country first imposed obligatory mask wearing outdoors in May 2020, but lifted it in June last year. Spain reimposed the measure just before the new year starts as COVID cases exploded due to the highly contagious Omicron variant. Last month, Spain ended its self-isolation requirement for people with mild symptoms of COVID-19. This was part of a shift towards treating virus as an endemic illness like flu. Testing now focuses on vulnerable people such as those over 60, caregivers, pregnant women, and those who are immunocompromised. Spain has one of the world's highest COVID-19 vaccination rates, with 92.4% of those over the age of 12 fully immunized against the virus. The country has so far recorded 102,747 deaths from COVID-19.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro vetoed a bill that would provide aid funds to cultural programs and artists hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. Bolsonaro's veto, published in the official Gazette, was for economic reasons. It argued that the Gustavo bill would breach Brazil's spending cap without sourcing enough funds elsewhere to compensate. The president's move triggered an outcry from opposition lawmakers who vowed to override him. Congressman Odair Cunha tweeted that Bolsonaro is afraid of culture and freedom of expression, like every lover of dictatorship, promising we're going to override that veto. Named after a widely beloved actor who died of COVID-19 last year, the Paulo Gustavo bill aimed to provide 3.86 billion reais or $820 million in federal funds to aid the cultural sector.
Back in Asia, shares in the Chinese pharmaceutical group Kintor rocketed after trials showed its COVID-19 drug to be highly effective, making it potentially China's first homegrown antiviral treatment. Kintor's founders said the drug proxalutamide cut the risk of hospitalization or death by 50% to 100%, depending on the length of treatment. He added that the drug also showed a reduced viral load against both the Delta and Omicron variants. Kintor will now apply for emergency use authorization for the treatment in China, the U.S., and other countries.
Colombia's Supreme Court approved the extradition to the U.S. of Dairo Antonio Usuga, the leader of the country's largest gang. Usuga, better known as Otoniel, led the Gulf Clan cartel and is wanted in the U.S. on drug trafficking charges. Colombia offered an $800,000 reward for information about his whereabouts, while the U.S. placed a $5 million bounty on his head. The most wanted man in Colombia was eventually captured in Antioquia province in an operation involving 500 soldiers supported by 22 helicopters.
In Bogota, Colombia, thousands of motorcyclists protested against restrictions on carrying passengers. The protest was against the ordinance that prohibits motorcyclists from carrying passengers on Thursday to Saturday nights. The measure was imposed by Bogota Mayor Claudia Lopez. She said that the issuance of the ordinance was for addressing the terrorist threat hanging over the capital in the run-up to the presidential elections. But the protesters said that the ordinance was useless because there are many people in the capital who depend on their motorbikes for their work.
NATO foreign ministers arrived in Brussels for a meeting on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, was due to attend the two-day meeting. NATO has ruled out intervening directly in the war in non-member Ukraine for fear of getting into a direct confrontation with Russia that could spiral into a nuclear conflict. But it has rushed tens of thousands of additional troops to the alliance's eastern flank and is eyeing further major buildups of forces to ward off any threats from Russia. Nevertheless, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu remained hopeful that peace negotiation will pursue despite the difficulties.
Unfortunately, the images we have seen from Bucha and from some other regions damage the relatively positive atmosphere. And we are still hopeful and cautiously optimistic. At the same time, we are realistic. There are difficult issues, but we have to continue our efforts.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, also known as AMLO, is not satisfied with how the United Nations is handling the Russia-Ukraine conflict. During his daily press conference, when questioned about a telephone conversation he had with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on humanitarian aid to Ukraine, AMLO said the UN is not doing its job the way it should. He called the war a failure of politics and urged further dialogue. AMLO, who has sought to remain neutral in the conflict, noted that Mexico itself had suffered invasions at the hands of Spain, France, and the United States. He also spoke out against suggestions that pro-Russian politicians in Mexico's Congress should have their U.S. travel visas revoked. He explained that the proposed visa suspension would not be fair or rational, and his government would send a diplomatic note of protest if it occurred.
A small group of Ukrainian soldiers who were already in the United States before Russia's invasion of their country are being trained to use the deadly Switchblade drones Washington is supplying to Kyiv. But Pentagon spokesman John Kirby says it was an opportunity for these soldiers to also train others when they go back home.
We took the opportunity to having them still in the country to give them a couple of days worth of training on the Switchblade so that they can go back, and they will be going back soon, back home, to train others in the Ukrainian military.
The United States announced Tuesday that it will send $100 million in additional anti-armor weapons to Ukraine. Kirby says the extra funding would be used to meet an urgent Ukrainian need, additional Javelin anti-armor systems. Up next, Beijing develops a passenger-carrying vehicle that can hurtle across the skies at 1 mile per second. Robot boat to map explosive volcanoes aftermath in Tonga. And 8 remarkable leaders honored in the annual Women of Excellence Awards in Washington, D.C. Mata ng Agila International will return.
This portion is brought to you by
Quezon City Motor Vehicle Inspection Center.
Robig Builders.
Laughter is in the air dahil amoy na ang simoy ng katatawanan sa pagbabalik ng comedy prank show na talagang mapapawaw ang lahat sa ating ditong Laugh Trip Moments.
I'm starving!
Are you crazy? Pagkulitan at tawanan kasama ang mga prangkito at prangkita na always ready sa mga hinanda naming pranks that will surely make you go crazy. Kasama pa rin ang mastermind ng mga nakakaaliw na practical jokes na si Joey De Leon. It's Bill! It's Bill! No! It's Bill! Oh no! It's Biro only! Malapit na sa Net 25.
Let's get together para sa mainit na summer. Yan ang inyong aabangan at yan naman ang ihahandog namin sa inyo for a summer special. Dito lang sa Net 25, of course, ito ang tahanan with Jed's Island. Kaya tara na gets and let's have some fun together only sa Net 25.
Minsan sa bayan ng pinagkaisahan, may dalawang pusong nagkaibigan. Si Binata, happy-go-lucky at nabubuhay ng kontento. Si Dalaga, maprinsipyo at hindi nagpapatalo. Pero mangingibabaw ang puso. Di naglaon, siya'y mabibigo. Hanggang muli silang nagtagpo. Sa bayan, sila'y manunuyo. Si Binata, nangakong magbabago. Sino matatalo? Si Dalaga, ayaw na magpaloko. Sino mananalo? Panalo o talo? It's you! Weeknights pagkatapos ng Mi Esperanza. Dito lang sa Net 25, prime time ng pamilya. Let's get together sa init ng summer. Mananalo ba ang prinsipyo ko? Magpapatalo ba ang puso ko?
The world just celebrated the International Women's Month to commemorate the cultural, political, and socio-economic achievements of women around the globe. Sa ating bansa, progresibong isinusulong ang pagtataguyod ng mas maraming oportunidad para sa mga kababaihan pagdating sa iba't ibang sektor ng lipunan. Nakilala natin ang mga kababaihang nagpakitang gilas sa iba't ibang larangan, sa gobyerno, sa negosyo, sa sports at entertainment, at maging ang mga nasa labor workforce, sa on-site environment man o sa digital economy. In this episode, we will be joined by Binibining Pilipinas Universe 2000, Miss Nina Ricci Alagao Flores, to know her thoughts about the important role of women in business and in our society.
Do not be afraid. This might be the perfect time for you to get started. Who knows that little idea of yours for a small business might bloom into something really big.
All these in this episode of Open for Business.
This portion is brought to you by SCCI Management and Insurance Agency Corporation and Source Alliance.
Russia's state communications watchdog says it would ban U.S. internet giant Google from advertising its services in the country and accuses YouTube of spreading fake news about its military campaign in Ukraine. Putin's government moved to block access to non-state media and information resources, and fears are also mounting that Google could not be next in line for the ban. The watchdog said Google-owned YouTube had committed numerous violations of Russian legislation and was one of the key platforms distributing fake news about the course of the special military operation in Ukraine, discrediting the armed forces of Russia. It also alleged YouTube of not tackling information resources of Ukrainian far-right organizations, including the controversial nationalist Azov battalion fighting in Mariupol, saying it has not deleted more than 12,000 pages declared extremist by Russia. Russia reiterated complaints that Google has blocked state-owned media such as RT and Sputnik and other Russian media sites.
8 women of remarkable leadership and contributions to female and community empowerment have been honored at the recent Women of Excellence Award ceremony in America's capital. Jessica Bautista reports from Washington, D.C.
8 distinguished women leaders in the nation's capital have been honored at the annual Washington Women of Excellence Award ceremony. Mayor Muriel Bowser and the Mayor's Office on Women's Policy and Initiatives, or MOWPI, concluded the district's Women's History Month events and activities by recognizing accomplishments of women leaders and empowering women residents of the nation's capital. The 2022 honorees are Disha Dyer, founder of Hook and Fasten, Judy Berman, Executive Director of Capitol Hill Village, Sandra Jackson, President and CEO of House of Ruth, Patricia Knowles, founder and executive director of the Women's Collective, Nikki Osei Barrett, co-founder of District Motherhood, Simona Knows Right, co-founder of District Motherhood, Maria Patricia Corrales, vice president of Capital Construction Enterprises and president of Yes DC, and Y. Michelle Kang, owner of Washington Spirit Women's Soccer Club.
NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hey said that the 3 Russian cosmonauts who boarded the International Space Station, or ISS, in spacesuits that echo the colors of Ukraine's flag were paying tribute to their university and not protesting Russia's invasion. The yellow and blue spacesuits worn by cosmonauts Oleg Artemyev, Denis Matveev, and Sergei Korsakov shocked many observers, who quickly assumed the space crew were showing support for Ukraine. But the 3 Russians were all graduates of Bauman Moscow State Technical University, which carries yellow and blue in its emblem.
Can you fly from Shanghai to New York in just a couple of hours? It is not a problem when you fly in a hypersonic space plane. Beijing Space Transportation, or the Lincoln Tianjin, plans to make this dream a reality with the development of a passenger-carrying vehicle that can hurtle across the skies at 1 mile per second, over twice the speed of Concorde. The Space Transportation released an animated publicity video showing passengers on board with no helmet or spacesuit required, and what appears to be a 12-seater space plane that nestles underneath an aerodynamic delta-shaped structure flanked by two Titanic booster rockets. The firm's website announced that it aims to launch its first suborbital space tourism test flight in 2025, followed by a complete full-scale global supersonic or hypersonic vehicle flight by 2030.
The United Nations paints a picture of a compact and walkable urban area with a relatively high density of housing, shops and offices located close together so that the journey from home to work and to services is short. Imagine this, a community with 4x4 blocks, only small streets, a playground or a market square, all basic services, grocery stores, hospitals, hair salons connected with cheap, reliable and plentiful public transport to wean households of their cars. That's how a community should be according to a UN researcher. Green and blue, plants and water, these are essential additions to the often monochrome urban landscape. Today, cities are net carbon emitters, but they could both reduce their emissions and absorb more carbon. Urban forests, tree-lined streets, green roofs or facades, parks or waterways are all examples. Growing cities are the perfect places for green innovation. But it's important for people who live in cities to understand why it's done, how they can use it, and how it is improving their lives. UN adds that with some 880 million people living in informal urban and settlements, much of the urban infrastructure of 2050 has yet to be built. And how these new cities of tomorrow will be designed and constructed will lock in patterns of urban energy behavior for decades, if not generations.
Some 7 million premature deaths each year were recorded due to air pollution. Of this number, 600,000 are children under 15. But among the many types of pollutants that exist, do you know what is the most harmful? Let's watch this.
Air pollution causes some 7 million premature deaths each year, of which 600,000 are children under 15. Many types of pollutants exist. The most harmful are microscopic particles in the air. These are produced by farming, industrial activity, wood burners, and road transport. The very finest particles released by fuels like diesel are the most dangerous. Smaller and often toxic, they penetrate deeper into the respiratory system and can enter the bloodstream. Ozone is also a pollutant. In the stratosphere it exists naturally, but at ground level it's a health hazard. It's created by reactions between nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds in the presence of sunlight. These compounds come especially from exhaust fumes. Ozone can damage vegetation, and it causes stress for people with asthma and respiratory illness. Another gas, nitrogen oxide, forms quickly in high-temperature combustion in vehicle engines and power plants. It reacts with moisture in the air to form a vapor of nitric acid, which can worsen bronchitis and other health problems. Pollutants such as sulfur dioxide, benzene, ammonia, and toxic metals like lead and cadmium can also affect the lungs, eyes, digestive tract, or nervous system.
Find yourself in a long layover at the airport? Our Texas correspondent Nanita Manawis recently discovered a pleasant way to pass the time at an airport in Phoenix, Arizona. She used the local transit system to squeeze in some scenic sightseeing destinations. Let's tag along.
Being stuck in the airport for long layovers does not have to be unpleasant. It can even be an adventure in itself. Today, I will share with you how my 7-hour wait at the airport became a mini vacation in Phoenix, Arizona. You only have a short layover. There are a variety of museum exhibits, available at Terminal 3 and 4 of the Sky Harbor Airport. Passengers with at least 6 hours to kill, however, have the opportunity to head out and explore Phoenix and surrounding cities like Tempe and Scottsdale using the Speedy Transit system.
We have a connection by the SkyTrain, takes you to it, and you can utilize the light rail. On this map, shows you where it goes. And there are all kinds of things. Down here would be downtown Phoenix, and this is downtown Tempe in this direction.
ValleyMetro.org provides public transit schedules, maps, and additional resources to help travelers navigate their way around the Phoenix area and more. A full day pass is only $4. From the airport, you can hop onto the SkyTrain and then switch to the Valley Metro Rail to go into downtown Phoenix, where you can visit top destinations like the Heard Museum, which was founded in 1929 and it specializes in Native American and Southwest art. Perhaps you prefer to get in touch with nature without venturing too far. Try exploring the Papago Park, which is known for its distinctive geological formations formed 5 to 6 million years ago. Enjoy the scenic views, the small lakes, and the variety of desert plants. Hike up to the hole in the rock. Take cold selfies and see the city of Phoenix from the top of this major landmark. However way you decide to spend your layover, be sure to give yourself plenty of time to get back to the airport for a quick meal or maybe a sweet treat before catching your next flight. Meanwhile, I hope you enjoyed this Phoenix Airport layover tour. Benita Manawes, Mata ng Agila International, Phoenix, Arizona. Trusted, connected, on point.
Experts have warned that TV companies will need to radically adapt themselves to the fast-evolving world of online entertainment if they hope to survive. On the horizon is the so-called metaverse, a loose term for the growing ecosystem of interactive online worlds, games, and 3D meeting places that are already attracting millions of users. While older consumers are still wedded to traditional TV, statistics show that viewership among under 35s has halved in the decade and will drop dramatically as the metaverse develops. Digital transformation specialists say TV companies have time to adapt, but they face a major challenge in catering at once to older people watching traditional broadcasts, middle-aged people shifting to streaming, and young people wanting interactive and social entertainment. Cathy Brem, head of innovation for France Television, said that if broadcasters want to stay relevant, they will have to position themselves across all these usages. Experts said that up to now, TV firms have been insulated from tech disruption because their advertising revenue was largely unaffected, unlike other traditional media like newspapers. They nonetheless warned that this could change faster than people realize because with the metaverse, brands have much more scope to promote themselves and sell their goods directly to users.
United Kingdom is sending a robot boat to survey the Tonga underwater volcano that blew up its top in January. This unscrewed surface vessel called Max Limer will gather data to help researchers understand precisely what happened. The 12-meter-long robot will spend several weeks directly on top of Tonga's submerged opening, or caldera, mapping its current shape. It can also lower cameras and instruments to measure environmental conditions and other factors that would impact marine life. Tonga's eruption caused one of the fiercest volcanic explosions in more than a century as gas-rich magma met cold seawater. It was powerful that it sent a plume of ash and vapor halfway to space and generated a tsunami that swept across the Pacific. Coming up in business news, JetBlue offers to buy Spirit Airlines, throwing the planned Spirit Frontier merger in doubt. Academy to discuss the actions and consequences for actor Will Smith after slapping Chris Rock at this year's Oscars telecast.
Wow.
And a new wave of Vietnamese craft coffee is blooming in America. Stay tuned for more stories around the globe when Mata ng Agila International returns.
This portion is brought to you by Canrev Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation and modernization. For more information, please contact Ami Kanke.
Mr. Bawal, ang galing mo namang sumayaw. Pwedeng pa-copy ng dance steps mo? Oo naman, Mr. Pwede. Mr. Bawal, ang ganda rin ng forma mo. Pwedeng pa-copy ng forma mo? Oo ba? Mr. Bawal, pakopya naman sagot mo.
Yan ang hindi pwede. Ang pagsilip sa sagot ng iba, lalong-lalo na sa botohan. Oy! Bawal yan!
Ayon sa Omnibus Election Code, ang pagtatangkang silipin at alamin ang boto ng iba ay isang election offense.
Mr. Pwede? Please report to the principal's office.
Ako si Mr. Bawal, nagpapaalala sa inyo na ang pagsilip sa boto ng ibang botante. Oy! Bawal yan!
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
First in business news, there is a bidding war in the discount airline market in the U.S. Two major players in that budget air travel category are involved. Here's our correspondent, Bobby Soriano in New York with the details.
Major news coming out of the U.S. airline industry, as JetBlue Airways announced on Tuesday a bid to acquire Spirit Airlines for $3.6 billion, setting up a bidding war with Frontier Airlines in the discount flying market. The all-cash bid of $33 a share marks a 52% premium of Spirit's price prior to its February 7 announcement of the deal with Frontier, according to JetBlue. Quote, JetBlue firmly believes this proposal constitutes a superior proposal under Spirit's merger agreement with Frontier and represents the most attractive opportunity for Spirit shareholders, JetBlue said. Frontier hit back at the JetBlue announcement and said its proposed merger with Spirit remained, quote, in the best interest of consumers and shareholders, a Frontier spokesperson said. Mergers and acquisitions are a common occurrence in the airline industry, with 70% of all U.S. airline traffic controlled by only 4 airlines: Delta, United, American Airlines, and Southwest Airlines. JetBlue, currently the 6th or 7th largest airline in the country, depending on the metric, hopes its acquisition of Spirit will help boost its share of the U.S. market at a time when customers are trying to find steep discounts to fight the inflating cost of airline travel. Bobby Soriano, Matanang Agila International, New York, New York, trusted, connected, on point.
Gogoro, a Taiwanese electric scooter startup that's backed by Al Gore and one of Apple's biggest suppliers, is about to have its day on Wall Street. Taiwan's baby Tesla will debut on the Nasdaq on Wall Street after merging with a special purpose acquisition company, Pima Global. The deal values the vehicle maker at more than $2 billion, more than triple of its last disclosed valuation of $800 million in September 2017. Horace Luke, Gogoro's CEO, sees scooters as just the beginning of an electric revolution.
Lewis Hamilton's hopes of winning a 3rd Australian Grand Prix were handed a reality check by Mercedes boss Toto Wolff, who warned there was no magic fix to the problems plaguing his car. The once dominant Silver Arrows fell short of Red Bull and Ferrari in the opening 2 races of the season, following a series of design changes to comply with new regulations for the 2022 season. The team was honest to point that porpoising or bouncing at high speed was their key problem and that they had been working around the clock to solve the issue at their British base. Wolff's team was also tipped to introduce a new rear wing in Melbourne. But while Mercedes won the last 8 Constructors' World Championships, Wolff remains cautious as they face various challenges in the race.
The Board of Governors for the Academy of Motion Pictures Art Sciences has moved up its planned date to decide on possible sanctions against Will Smith for slapping Chris Rock at this year's Oscars ceremony. Academy President David Rubin stated in a letter that he is calling a board meeting for April 8 rather than the previously scheduled April 18 meeting to address Will Smith's actions during the Oscars broadcast on March 27. Rubin also said that Smith's suspension or expulsion is no longer a possibility and the legally prescribed timetable no longer applies. Smith slapped Rock after the comic star made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's close-cropped hair.
Now, if you are a fan of post-impressionist art, you might want to visit the Van Gogh Immersive Experience in Washington to get a glimpse of this artist's intriguing masterpieces and his fascinating life. Jeff Senidad reports straight from Washington, D.C.
Have you ever wondered how it would be if you were in a painting? Not just any painting, but
A celebrated masterpiece like The Bedroom at Arles of no less than the greatest artist, the greatest genius of his time, the Vincent Van Gogh. Join us as we journey to the Vincent Van Gogh's universe.
Today, we will explore his life, his oeuvre, and his secrets as never seen before through a cutting-edge 360-degree digital projection. Created by Italian artist Massimiliano Siccardi, music composed by Luca Longobardi, the Van Gogh immersive experience features more than 400 licensed works by one of the most influential figures in post-impressionist art.
This exhibit is a 360 immersive and interactive experience where people are going to be able to rediscover Van Gogh's life, not only his life and his artwork, also some secrets, techniques, and influence in a completely different way.
This 60 to 70-minute COVID-safe experience is designed for every member of the family to discover and appreciate.
We will be very happy if a visitor step out knowing more about Van Gogh's life, about his secrets, and having a fun time in a different way that the people used to enjoy art, you know.
Enticing visitors to surround themselves with the inspirations behind Van Gogh's magnificent works, including Vincent's Bedroom at Arles and Starry Night over the Rhone. Exhibits organizers have this invitation.
Just came open-minded to rediscover an amazing artist in different rooms with different angles that I'm completely sure they will enjoy. With older people, young people, it's a family-friendly experience.
Astonishing in scale and breathtakingly imaginative, Van Gogh's art is experienced in a completely new and remarkable way. Jeff Sanidad, Mata ng Agila International, Washington, D.C. Trusted, connected, on point.
Today, we will take you to a Vietnamese cafe in Texas where coffee is more than just a cup. Jane Kathleen Gregorio has the story.
Today on Color My World, we learn about a local coffee roaster and cafe that brings the taste of Vietnam to customers here in South Texas. Owner and entrepreneur Christian Wang wants to bring the exotic flavors he grew up with as a child in Vietnam to his customers in South Texas. He recalls how his parents operated a coffee stand in Saigon that specialized in café sua, or traditional Vietnamese coffee with condensed milk.
Coffee stand. It's kind of similar to a lemonade stand, but it's a coffee stand. It's not a coffee shop on the side of the street. And that's what I grew up with because I was born in 1993. You know, I see my mom doing a traditional café sua. And I see my dad roasting coffee in the pan by hand, you know, old school, manually back then.
Now, as the owner of Saigon Civet Cafe, Christian Wang believes coffee should be savored and enjoyed with calmness and relaxation. Working with a locally owned independent farm in Vietnam, Christian Wang imports hundreds of kilos of coffee beans to Texas that are then roasted in-house at the cafe.
So our whole goal here is that we decide to export our origin directly came from Vietnam, and we try to introduce the Americans with a new taste. Everything in here is handmade. Everything in here is from Vietnam. I try to replicate Saigon, Vietnam as the cafe. You know, coffee is not just the traditional Vietnam coffee. And, you know, it's about life. It's connect with people. It's connect with science. It's connect with nature. So I just read all about it. I'm like, well, I guess I finally have a different adventure in my life. 2019, I decided to searching for a farmer in Vietnam. And we do have a contract with farmer now, which is we import directly from farmer. Every 3 months, we always have like 250 kilo coming in.
The cafe offers handcrafted coffee, espresso beverages, teas, and smoothies with an Asian twist. From traditional Vietnamese coffee to exotic creations such as coconut milk, ube, and pandan lattes, and even an espresso lemonade. Saigon Civet Cafe also offers traditional Vietnamese cuisine like banh mi sandwiches, rice bowls, pate chaud, and a variety of pastries. By bringing the coffee culture of the Far East to the coastal bend, Christian Wong hopes his cafe can give customers a refuge for relaxation while enjoying a good cup of quality coffee.
I would like to change that to-go culture, you know? That's why every time people actually order like a cup of coffee, the cashier or the barista always encourage customers, you know, to sit. I mean, we don't mind to serve you a ceramic cup and washing dishes after, but from what I believe is, you know, to serve a cup of coffee in a ceramic cup is always tastes better than a to-go cup. Plus, you know, it's gave you a little choice, man, to actually, you know, enjoy a cup of coffee.
Jane Kathleen Gregorio, Mata ng Agila International, Corpus Christi, Texas. Trusted, connected, on point.
Want me a cup of coffee. Well, take a look back at some of the major historical events that happened on this day. On April 7, 1948, the World Health Organization, or WHO, was established as a specialized agency of the United Nations. It acts as a coordinating authority on international public health. On the same day in 2001, the Mars Odyssey spacecraft took off on a 6-month 460 million kilometer journey to the Red Planet. It reached Mars on October 24, 2001. It was designed to orbit the planet Mars and hunt for evidence of past or present water and volcanic activity to help answer the question of whether life has ever existed on the planet. And also in 2009, former Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori was sentenced to 25 years in prison for ordering killings and kidnappings by security forces.
And before we conclude tonight's broadcast, let us ponder on a quote from George Washington, the first president of the United States of America. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all.
Interesting.
Wow. I say start small, CJ. Be a peace-loving person. Treat people well.
I know. Well, you know, we also have to remember cultural understanding and mutual respect. And as consumers of information, it is our duty to always check, is this right, is this wrong? So we don't, you know, fuel misunderstanding and misinformation.
Always apply sound judgment.
Is that? Oh. And that's a wrap for tonight's broadcast. Catch the latest updates on our social media channels. I am CJ Hirro.
And I'm Nina Ricci, Alagao, Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.